So, of course, in my last video on Kolchak the Night Stalker, it all began with a TV movie called The Night Stalker. Imagine that. So, it did very well ratings-wise. So, hey, let's do another one. So they did. This one they called The Night Strangler, because Night Stalker was just meant to be that initial title about the vampire story. Well, so, of course, we left it last time as Kolchak was run out of Vegas and ruined and threatened with prison if he ever dared return, so he had to leave. Lost his girlfriend, all that, lost his job, and so, you know, ends up pretty bad. But he gets a new hairpiece for the next one, and ends up in Seattle. In this story, which in a lot of ways is very similar to the first one, but it doesn't involve a vampire. And interestingly enough, the deal was for him to never mention the story again, or he'd be in trouble. But then again, the jurisdiction of Vegas can't have that much of a far reach, and someone's going to go through the trouble of extraditing a guy who talks about vampire stories. So it opens up. Well, it opens up with someone being killed in the narration of Kolchak. But we find Kolchak in a bar, I believe, or maybe a bar and restaurant. Anyway, Vincenzo is there. He's got a new job editing a paper in Seattle. And lo and behold, he hears the voice, and there's Kolchak in there trying to convince someone of the story of the vampire. And everyone's looking at him like he's crazy. So, of course, he feels bad about what happened to Kolchak, so he gives him a job at this new paper. And as luck would have it, another supernatural series of murders is afoot. So, Kolchak, of course, investigates a series of these murders, which, once again, they figure, oh, there's, you know, some maniac killing women. And quite a few of them are exotic dancers. And so he encounters quite a few. One of them, and I guess this was like the template of a lot of shows, then there was always the girlfriend of the week. And nothing comes about it, though he does make mention that he had quite the interest in her and all of that. But yeah, nothing really comes of that. And when the series gets going, they don't really follow that template further in the episodes. But here, the repetition of both TV movies is, you know, these women are being killed, and ultimately he begins to, you know, get the details to it and traces it down to old stories. He meets a crazy guy in the records room who talks about the similarities of these murders and what people are describing about the killer. And turns out, wow, there's similar cases, but they're like 21 years apart. And he traces it all the way back to the late 1800s. And, well, not that late, pretty much, because it turns out the killer hails from the Civil War days and was a doctor at the time. But he figured out the elixir of life, which requires killing people to get their blood and stuff. So, very similar to a vampire story, just, you know, it didn't require all that biting stuff. It just required murder. And so this guy does that to restore himself. If he doesn't, then he'll immediately disintegrate and die. And so there's several belly dancers that Kolchak encounters, one of which is the stereotypical ditzy blonde, who turns out to be a lesbian. She's got this rather large woman. They don't really say it, but that's what the deal is, you know. But unfortunately, the blonde falls victim to the guy. I don't really recall anything saying why it had to be exotic dancers. But it's what the guy was into, you know. So anyway, you know, once again, nobody likes Kolchak. Kolchak, and they don't believe him, and he's trying to deal with this. One of the interesting elements about it is that it suggested that the city of Seattle, the old city, was buried underneath the current city, and so there was tours and you could go look at the old city underneath, and so the killer was living in that. So oh, okay. And eventually there's like vagrants living in there, and they talk about the weird stuff. Well, one in particular actually, and he goes through all that, and eventually he does encounter the killer, the Night Strangler, who then decides, well, you're not going to get away, I'm going to kill you, so I'll tell you my whole story. I mean, I've only waited 100 years to tell somebody. So with the amount of victims he had, that was what he needed in order to concoct the elixir, and he's just about to take it when Kolchak attacks and destroys it. And the guy's trying to kill him, but of course he begins to rot. Turns out the killer was Oscar Goldman for the $6 Million Man. That's the actor who played it, who may or may not have been D.B. Cooper. But anyway, very similar to the first one. It just had its own stylings here and there. Of course, it was a different locale. And then the old city setup was rather creepy and scary looking and that sort of thing. It really helped with the mood and whatnot that sets up the whole thing. So, well, once again, Kolchak is in trouble, even though this time they walk in and the killer actually ends his own life because he's about to fall apart anyway. So he leaps off to his demise down below, and there's really no means by which to charge Kolchak with murder this time. But and the police in and of themselves are not so much interested in him, but the paper, the publisher, owner, what have you, doesn't want him around. And so he's fired, gotta go, and the story won't be published as is. It's just a simple story of, well, the killer was caught and has expired, and blah, blah, blah. So he's all upset. He cusses out Vincenzo, but when he leaves, Vincenzo gets a call by the boss, and so now he's fired as well. And it ends with them going to New York City, and the belly dancer that Kolchak actually was interested in, she's with them too. She was pursuing her degree, but being involved with Kolchak and stuff ruined her as well. But this time she's in the back seat of the car that Kolchak is driving as the three of them leave Seattle for New York City. And the idea there is, which is where he wanted to end up from Vegas. So he's headed that way. Of course, that's not what happens in the series. They end up in Chicago. So they never quite made it to New York. Maybe he got there eventually. But that's how the second movie goes. And so it's fine for what it is. It's a cool, interesting concept here and there about some kind of potion that basically a mad scientist comes up with, and it works. And it is the sort of thing that elements of this would find its way in the X-Files. There was a guy who needed some hormone from people's spines or something like that. I can't even remember how it all went. And then he would make a nest and cocoon himself for years or whatever. And then the killings would start again. So it's a similar type take. And, it's all creepy and whatnot. And a lot of this was always that there was these that supernatural elements were true, but were largely unknown for the most part, and the stories never quite got it. And here you have a guy who witnesses it, but no one's going to believe him. And such was the nature of the Kolchak series. So that was it. It's just the weakness in it is that step by step and plot wise, very similar to the vampire story in a lot of ways. But it had its own charm and whatnot. I enjoyed it, and it's fine in that. But so the plan following this was to do yet another one, because this one did well, and they were going to do The Night Killers. And apparently, no, it was not going to take place in New York. They were going to go to Honolulu, Hawaii. I don't know what but boy, you really get lost trying to find your way to New York. So this time UFOs would have been, which they do eventually get to UFOs in the TV series, but apparently the plot for Night Killers was going to be UFOs and androids being used to replace people, stuff like that. And of course, Kolchak foils the plot, but of course is left with no one believing that it ever happened, I'm sure. But they decided, you know what, a regular TV series might work. And in my opinion, it did, and it should have, but there were other factors that led to the doom of the series. But that was the decision they made, and so elements of the third film, made it to other shows within the series. But they decided to move from the TV movie format, and we'll get to that in the next review of Kolchak, the Night Stalker.